Hello there, I'm Henry Keane and this is News Pulse, the beating heart of the news from Ukraine and for the world. The Vatican announced sad news, the death of Pope Francis. The day before, he made his last public appearance and greeted Christians on Easter.
Benedicat vos, omnipotens Deus, Pater, et Filius, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
In his Easter message, the pontiff mentioned war-ravaged Ukraine, calling for peace and encouraging the parties to the conflict to work towards a just and lasting peace. The 88-year-old Francis was hospitalized on February 14th with a severe respiratory infection, which led to the most serious deterioration in his health in his 12-year papacy. The Easter truce promised by dictator Putin just didn't happen, just as expected. According to the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, during the so-called truce, Russia attacked Ukrainian positions 2,935 times. Ukrainian positions were attacked by Russians with anything that you can name literally. Small arms, artillery, FPV drones. Well, see how Putin's fake truce never happened in the episode.
Last week, Russia's Ministry of Defense announced that, according to an order from Putin, a so-called Easter ceasefire would last 30 hours from Saturday evening to midnight on Monday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy emphasized that the Ukrainian military would respond in kind, mirroring the actions of the Russian side.
If Russia is suddenly ready to genuinely commit to a format of complete and unconditional silence, Ukraine will act accordingly, responding as Russia does. Silence in response to silence, defensive strikes in response to attacks. If true silence is established, Ukraine proposes to extend it beyond the Easter period on April 20th. That would reveal Russia's real intentions, because 30 hours might be enough for headlines, but not for genuine trust-building. 30 days could give peace a real chance. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, on Telegram.
Despite the Kremlin's announcement of a so-called Easter ceasefire, the aggressor state is violating it itself. According to President Zelenskyy, Russian forces continue shelling, assaults, and drone attacks. In Kherson region, a civilian was killed by a drone strike.
A man born in 1967 was killed in Stanislav after being hit by a combined enemy strike yesterday. He sustained fatal injuries. Alexander Prokudin, head of the Kherson Regional Military Administration, on Telegram.
Putin reportedly ordered a reduction in frontline attacks, but his so-called ceasefire does not apply to Russia's Kursk and Belgorod regions, Zelenskyy noted.
Hostilities continue, Russia strikes continue. On some frontline directions, it's still Russian artillery we hear, not any promise of silence from the Russian leadership. Drones are still being used. Volodymyr Zelenskyy, president of Ukraine, on Telegram.
On April 19th, the day before Easter, Ukraine and Russia conducted the largest prisoner exchange in recent months. According to Ukraine's coordination headquarters for the treatment of prisoners of war, 277 Ukrainians were released from Russian captivity. Among them were soldiers from the armed forces, the National Guard, the Border Guard Service, and the State's Special Transport Service. This marked the 63rd exchange since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion. In total, 4,552 Ukrainians have returned home, with another 529 released outside of formal exchanges.
I'm incredibly happy to see my girlfriend again after 3 years. When I called her from captivity, I couldn't see her. I can't describe how I feel. I'm so grateful she waited for me. I promised her that if she waited, I'd marry her. Now I will keep that promise. I'm amazed, and how strong our country is and how much it's changed in the past 3 years. As we were driving here, I saw people lining the roads to greet us. We are a very strong country. I am convinced of that.
Back on March 11th, in Saudi Arabia, Ukraine and the United States agreed on a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire. However, according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Andriy Sybiha, Moscow responded not with actions, but with further demands, and instead intensified attacks, targeting civilians and infrastructure.
Putin has now made statements about his alleged readiness for a ceasefire, 30 hours instead of 30 days. Unfortunately, we have had a long history of his statements not matching his actions. We know his words cannot be trusted, and we will look at actions, not words. Russia can agree at any time to the proposal for a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire, which has been on the table since March. Andriy Sybiha, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, on social network X.
The international community also remains skeptical of the Russian dictator's statements. Italy's Ministry of Foreign Affairs noted that any sign of peace is welcome, but Russia's commitment to a ceasefire remains unclear. The UK Foreign Office urged Moscow not just for a short pause, but for a complete halt to hostilities. And the European Commission reminded that Ukraine already accepted an unconditional ceasefire over a month ago. If Russia truly sought peace, it could have stopped the war at any time.
Russia has a track record as an aggressor, so first we need to see any actual halt of the aggression and clear deeds for a lasting ceasefire. Russia could stop this war at any moment if it really wanted to. We continue to support Ukraine for a long, just, and comprehensive peace. Anita Hipper, lead European spokeswoman for Foreign Affairs and Security, from the Reuters publication.
The United States also responded with skepticism to the Kremlin's gesture. U.S. Representative Joe Wilson called Putin's initiative a fake and labeled him a cynical liar.
War criminal Putin reminds us of his complete and utter depravity and disdain for human life by bombing playgrounds, Christian bakeries, and declaring a fake Easter ceasefire, while continuing an invasion he started and could end today. History will remember him as a weak and pathetic person. Grateful to stand with Ukraine. Joe Wilson, United States representative.
Meanwhile, an American delegation is expected to travel to London in the coming days to continue ceasefire talks. U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, Keith Kellogg, told Fox News that further steps toward a ceasefire were discussed during a March 17th meeting in Paris between Ukrainian and U.S. delegations, and those talks will go on.
And I think we've got a pretty good solution set. The minerals deal is one of them. Also go to a comprehensive ceasefire. When I talk about a comprehensive ceasefire, it's sea, air, land, industrial as well, for a period of at least 30 days, and then it builds to a longer peace deal, a permanent peace deal as well.
In parallel with the London talks, the Trump administration is reportedly preparing a separate diplomatic initiative, according to CNN. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is planning a meeting with Russian representatives. The aim is to convince Moscow to support a framework ceasefire agreement along the front lines. CNN reports that the proposal has already been discussed over the phone between U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Reported by Nikita Skoblikov, UATV News.
Moscow is trying to achieve sanctions relief, obviously, as a part of the ceasefire talks in Ukraine. Well, the Kremlin wants what he wants in everything: lifting the embargo on flights by its airlines, resuming gas sales to Europe, and lifting sanctions, of course. Kristina Dombrovska will tell you how the EU reacts to such steps taken by Moscow.
Russia is reportedly trying to secure permission for its airlines to use U.S. airspace as part of ceasefire negotiations regarding the war in Ukraine, according to Politica. Moscow has also approached Washington with a request to purchase Boeing aircraft, proposing to pay using funds from frozen Russian state assets. However, the European Union is firmly opposed.
Russia's effort to get U.S. to drop aviation sanctions hits EU resistance. The EU isn't keen, and without Europe on board, it won't be easy for Russian carriers to fly to the United States. Beyond the political decisions on sanctions, the EU official also pointed to major safety and security issues related to the possible reopening of EU airspace to Russian jets. From Politico publication,
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, its civil aviation sector has sharply declined under Western sanctions. As a result, aircraft have been left without regular maintenance and spare parts. Russian airlines have resorted to cannibalizing, dismantling some planes to keep others running. Brussels has raised concerns over safety risks, particularly the use of counterfeit and the uncertified components in Russian aircraft. Additionally, under sanctions, Russia was obligated to return civilian aircraft leased from European companies, but has failed to do so.
These talks about the U.S. potentially restoring air traffic with Russia, well, let's be honest, they're theoretical. They haven't thought a few steps ahead, and those steps ahead mean compensation. If there's no compensation, I believe the European Union would have full legal grounds to physically detain any aircraft flying over its territory, land them, and investigate whether these are aircraft that were, in fact, stolen.
The European Union has repeatedly stated that it will not lift sanctions on Russia until Moscow ends its war against Ukraine.
We unanimously decided that now is not the time to lift any sanctions. Sanctions will not be lifted until peace is clearly established. Therefore, we plan to maintain economic pressure.
By May 6, all EU member states must submit roadmaps for phasing out Russian fuel imports by 2027. This will signal to companies the need to seek alternatives. President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, said in an April 18th interview with Bloomberg.
Especially on the shadow fleet and certain industrial capacities. This creates space in the market for imports from other suppliers, which means new opportunities for the United States. Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, in an interview with Bloomberg.
Since 2022, the EU has been steadily increasing imports of liquefied natural gas (LNG). In 2024, American LNG made up 16.7% of EU imports, while Russian LNG accounted for 18.8%. But in the beginning of 2025, US gas exports to the EU had already surpassed Russian volumes. Currently, the main buyers of Russian LNG in Europe are France, Spain, and Belgium. Germany, however, halted Russian fuel imports following the invasion and has since constructed several large LNG terminals for sea-based deliveries.
Our dependency on Russian gas stems from shutting down nuclear power plants, coal-fired plants, and reducing domestic natural gas production, which made us reliant on imports. That dependency still exists.
According to Reuters, the European Commission is expected to propose a 17th sanctions package against Russia by June. However, it will likely not include a ban on Russian LNG imports. Instead, the EU will unveil a new roadmap to reduce reliance on Russian energy. One EU diplomat noted that Brussels still considers Russian LNG exports a useful bargaining chip in negotiations over ending the war. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Kristina Dombrovska, UATV News.
Poland should gain access to France's nuclear umbrella to protect itself from a potential Russian threat, President Andrzej Duda said in an interview with Bloomberg. According to him, and actually to the common sense as well, the issue is especially relevant due to Lukashenko's recent statements about the deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. Earlier, President Emmanuel Macron proposed the EU countries could use the French nuclear arsenal to deter Moscow. Look deep into the story to know the details.
The president of Poland, Andrzej Duda, has repeatedly called on the United States to deploy American nuclear weapons on Polish soil, and on April 18th, in an interview with Bloomberg News, he also voiced support for Warsaw gaining access to France's nuclear umbrella. These two initiatives, President Duda emphasized, are not mutually exclusive and do not contradict one another.
There was a question from a journalist asking whether we are interested in the French nuclear umbrella in light of President Emmanuel Macron's statements. I said, of course, because any form of nuclear protection would be valuable to us, just like American nuclear sharing. We have been advocating for nuclear sharing for many years. So far, no final decision has been made, but I want to state very clearly that, from my point of view, Poland's position on this issue remains unchanged.
In March 2025, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, proposed using France's nuclear arsenal as a deterrent against Russia. According to the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk, Warsaw is currently in talks with Paris about the initiative. On April 10th, the president of France announced that the two countries are finalizing a treaty that will include, among other things, defense and nuclear energy cooperation.
In these troubled times, it is crucial to work together and face common challenges. I am pleased with the very substantive conversation I just had with the Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. We discussed progress in the preparation of the bilateral treaty that we are finalizing between Poland and France in strategic areas: defense, energy, nuclear energy, transport, scientific, linguistic, and cultural cooperation. This treaty will further strengthen the ties between our countries. Emmanuel Macron, the President of France, on X social network.
Since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Kremlin has repeatedly threatened European Union and NATO member states with nuclear weapons. Nuclear blackmail has become a regular element in Russian rhetoric. On April 15th, the director of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, Sergei Narishkin, once again issued threats toward Putin and the Baltic states. He claimed that in the event of a conflict with NATO, they would suffer first.
Poland and the Baltic countries are distinguished by high aggressiveness, at least in words. They are constantly rattling their weapons, and Poland has gone so far as to announce its plans to install about 2 million anti-tank mines along the borders with Belarus and the Kaliningrad region of the Russian Federation, and would very much like, expects, and hopes to receive American nuclear weapons as well. Sergei Narishkin, the director of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Russia, in an interview with Belarusian media.
According to President Duda, Narishkin's threats are classic Russian disinformation intended to mislead.
This is what Russia says, which is transferring its nuclear weapons to Belarus, brazenly bringing them closer to the borders of NATO and the European Union. Russia, which is behaving aggressively towards NATO and implementing its cruel and bloodthirsty imperialism, attacked Ukraine for 3 years. Andrzej Duda, the president of Poland, in an interview with Polish media.
Warsaw and the Baltic states regard Russia as the main threat to European security. Previously, the Ministry of National Defense of Poland, Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, stated that his country is prepared for potential Russian aggression. Poland's 2025 budget includes record-high defense spending. Warsaw has also secured financial support from the European Union to strengthen its border with Belarus, Russia's close ally.
Poland plans to allocate 4.7% of its GDP to defense this year. That's the highest among NATO and EU countries. We will continue this trend. 5% is definitely the target we want to reach next year. We are getting closer and closer to that goal. And due to the multi-year contracts we've signed, we'll have to maintain a high level of defense spending for many years to come.
Meanwhile, Estonia has announced large-scale military exercises scheduled for May involving NATO allied forces, including troops from the United Kingdom and France. According to the Estonian Defense Forces, more than 60,000 troops will take part. The goal of the drills is to test NATO's readiness to respond to potential threats and to practice a rapid, large-scale deployment of allied forces on Estonian territory. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Kristina Dombrovskaya, UATV News.
It was me, Henry Keane, in News Post. Goodbye and see you at the next beat.